Under the soft glow of Los Angeles twilight, Forrester Creations seemed to shimmer with the same old grandeur that had defined it for decades. Yet beneath the glimmer of crystal chandeliers and the perfume of success, something new, something uncanny, was about to shift the entire legacy of the Forrester dynasty. Deke stood in his modest workspace, surrounded by sketches, bolts of silk, and fragments of unfinished designs. He had always been the outsider among the polished titans of the fashion world, too bold, too young, too unwilling to play by their unspoken rules. His pieces, though unconventional, carried a raw power that had drawn attention even from Hope Logan, whose delicate optimism had long served as the house's moral compass. What began as professional admiration between them had slowly grown into something deeper, an unspoken connection that neither dared to define. But on that particular afternoon, Deke's life, and hopes, was about to be torn open by a single envelope. The package arrived without warning. The handwriting on the brown paper was elegant but unfamiliar, and the seal bore an insignia he did not recognize. Inside was a letter from a law firm he had never heard of, claiming to represent the estate of Stephanie Forrester. Beneath the formalities lay something far more personal, a handwritten note, aged and trembling, signed by Stephanie herself. The ink had faded, but her voice lived in every word. She confessed that decades ago, during a turbulent time in her life, she had given birth to a child she was forced to surrender. Circumstances had demanded secrecy, family pressure, reputation, and a husband's rage. She wrote of regret, of sleepless nights haunted by the sound of a baby she never held again. And then came the devastating truth. That child was Deke. He read the letter again and again, the words bleeding into each other, the edges of the paper trembling in his hands. His mother, the woman who had abandoned him, was Stephanie Forrester, the matriarch whose portrait hung in the Forrester mansion, the legend whose name shaped an empire. The letter went on to state that legal documents confirming his lineage were enclosed, along with instructions for the division of her estate. Deke was, by law and by blood, entitled to a significant share of the Forrester fortune. But more than wealth, the letter carried something far heavier: belonging. The sense of rootless wandering that had followed him his entire life suddenly twisted into something complex and painful. He was a Forrester. The revelation felt like both salvation and punishment. When the news broke, it moved through Los Angeles like wildfire. Gossip columns, social media, and industry insiders all devoured the story of the lost Forrester heir. The mansion on Beverly Ridge became a fortress of denial. Ridge and Thorne were stunned into silence when the lawyers arrived to confirm the claim. DNA tests, sealed court orders, and signatures from Stephanie's own hand left no room for dispute. The Forrester brothers found themselves facing not only the ghost of their mother's past, but also a living reminder of her imperfection. To them, Deke wasn't family. He was intrusion, evidence of betrayal, a crack in the marble facade of their legacy. Ridge, in particular, took the revelation as a personal affront. He had spent his life carrying the Forrester torch, believing himself the rightful heir to both the creative and moral lineage of the house. Now this young designer, bold, passionate, and unpredictable, was being hailed as Stephanie's true son. The irony cut him deeply. Deke's very existence threatened to undermine the mythology Ridge had built around his parents, especially his mother, whom he had always seen as the embodiment of grace and control. He could not reconcile the image of the formidable Stephanie with the woman who had hidden an illegitimate child. It made her human, and in Ridge's eyes, that made her weaker than he ever wanted to believe. Thorne, on the other hand, felt something different: envy mixed with pity. For years, he had lived in Ridge's shadow, always the second son, the forgotten Forrester. Deke's sudden arrival seemed like a cruel cosmic joke, another brother to compete with, another rival for affection and inheritance. Yet there was something in Deke's eyes that disarmed him, a vulnerability that Thorne recognized from his own reflection. Deke wasn't here to destroy them. He was just trying to understand where he belonged. Still, Bloodlines have a way of igniting old insecurities, and Thorne's empathy soon gave way to defensiveness. Hope, meanwhile, was caught in an emotional storm of her own. Her friendship with Deke had blossomed in the creative chaos of Forrester Creations. Late nights spent sketching, laughter shared over missteps on the runway, quiet moments when he spoke about his past without bitterness. There was a sincerity in him that had reminded her of what she once believed love could be. But now, this revelation changed everything. Deke was not just a colleague or a friend. He was a Forrester, a name entangled with hers in ways she could not have foreseen. She was married to Liam, yet she could not ignore the magnetic pull toward Deke, the curiosity, the empathy, the emotional intimacy that had quietly deepened into something dangerous. His pain resonated with her own longing for identity, for freedom from the expectations that came with her last name. And in that resonance, boundaries began to blur. The press conference that followed was pure theater. Ridge stood beside the family attorney, his posture rigid, his voice strained as he confirmed the legal recognition of Deke as part of the Forrester family. But beneath the polished words, resentment simmered. Deke, invited to stand beside them, felt like a stranger at his own coronation. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and through it all, he could feel Ridge's disdain, Thorne's skepticism, and the calculating curiosity of those who smelled scandal. In that moment, Deke realized he wasn't just inheriting wealth, he was inheriting enemies. Days turned into weeks, and the tension within the Forrester mansion became unbearable. Deke's arrival disrupted the fragile balance between the brothers, reopening wounds they had long pretended were healed. The staff whispered about him in corridors, unsure whether to treat him as heir or imposter. Hope tried to act as mediator, defending Deke's right to belong, but her empathy only fueled Liam's jealousy. Liam saw what she refused to admit, the growing closeness between her and the man who now shared her creative space. Every stolen glance, every unfinished sentence between them deepened the fracture in her marriage. One night, Deke returned to his apartment to find another envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a photograph, an old black-and-white image of a young Stephanie holding a baby, her eyes fierce but tender. On the back, a single sentence written in her hand, "You were the one I couldn't protect." It was both confession and apology. That night, Deke sat alone in the dark, the city lights bleeding through the blinds, and felt the full weight of what it meant to be a Forrester. To belong to a family built on beauty and lies, on creation and concealment. His existence had resurrected the family's ghosts, but it also gave him power. Power he never sought but could no longer ignore. Ridge, consumed by pride, began to quietly maneuver against him. Board meetings grew colder, designs accidentally misplaced, credits reassigned. Thorne oscillated between pity and complicity, unwilling to challenge Ridge, yet unable to embrace cruelty. Hope watched the spiral unfold, torn between loyalty and truth. Her heart ached for Deke, whose passion for art mirrored her own yearning for meaning beyond the brand. But she also feared the chaos that followed him, the way his presence exposed every hidden fault line in the Forrester family. Loving him, even silently, meant betraying everything she stood for. The true turning point came when Deke unveiled his first independent collection, a tribute to the woman he never knew but whose shadow defined him. The show, held not in a grand venue but in a repurposed warehouse, stunned the fashion world. The designs were raw yet elegant, blending structure and emotion, chaos and control. He titled it Bloodlines. Every piece was a conversation between past and present, between the woman who abandoned him and the man he became. The audience was silent at first, then erupted into applause. Critics hailed it as genius, calling Deke the rebirth of the Forrester legacy. But inside the Forrester mansion, that praise sounded like treason. Ridge's anger reached its breaking point. He accused Deke of exploiting their mother's memory, of turning family pain into spectacle. Deke, in turn, accused Ridge of hypocrisy, of living off a legacy he didn't understand. Their confrontation was brutal, not just in words but in truth. Ridge saw in Deke everything he feared: authenticity, hunger, and the kind of genius that didn't need validation. And Deke saw in Ridge the very thing Stephanie had tried to escape: the tyranny of perfection. Hope arrived too late to stop them, and when she did, the sight of two men bound by blood but divided by pride broke something inside her. For the first time, she realized that love and legacy could not coexist. In the aftermath, Deke walked away from Forrester Creations. He declined the inheritance, donated his share to charity, and disappeared from the public eye. But his departure did not end the story. It deepened it. Hope, disillusioned with Liam and torn by guilt, found herself haunted by the memory of Deke's final words to her, that creation meant nothing without courage. Those words became the catalyst for her own transformation. She began designing again, not for fame or family, but for herself. Each stitch became a confession, each fabric a reflection of the pain and beauty that bound them all. Ridge and Thorn, left to rebuild what remained of the Forrester Empire, found themselves haunted by their mother's silence. The legend of Stephanie Forrester had always been one of strength and control, but her final secret revealed her humanity. She had loved imperfectly, just as they did. Perhaps that was the truest inheritance of all: not wealth, not power, but the acceptance that even icons are flawed. Months later, an anonymous collection appeared at Paris Fashion Week under the label DF Atelier. Critics whispered that the initials stood for Deke Forrester. The collection was minimalist, haunting, and intimate, with each piece carrying a single stitched word: forgiveness. Hope sat in the front row, tears in her eyes, realizing that Deke had finally found peace in the only way he knew: through art. And for the first time in years, the Forrester legacy felt alive again, not as a monument to perfection, but as a testament to survival. In the end, Deke's arrival did not destroy the Forresters. It revealed them. Beneath the glamour and the silk, they were human, bound by guilt, love, and the relentless pursuit of meaning. And though the empire would never be the same, perhaps that was the point. Beauty, as Deke once said to Hope, was never meant to be pure. It was meant to be honest. And in that honesty, even a most fractured family could begin again. Under the silver dawn that hung over Los Angeles, Forrester Creations awoke to a day that was supposed to mark the end of grief. The courtyard had been draped in white lilies, and the air shimmered faintly with the perfume of loss. Steffi stood beside Finn, her hand clasping his with a quiet firmness that barely concealed the tremor beneath her skin. It was the morning they would finally say goodbye to Luna, the young woman whose death had broken something sacred in both of them. The ceremony, private yet suffocatingly grand, was meant to restore order to chaos, to give closure to a tragedy that had torn through their family and their business like a storm. But in the silence between prayers, in the heavy stillness of that morning, there lingered a feeling that something about this ending was wrong, as if death itself had been staged. Liam had not planned to attend. He told himself that Luna's story had already been written and sealed, that his presence would only reopen old wounds. But fate often writes its own scripts, and that day, fate led him to overhear something that would unravel every truth they thought they knew. As he walked past the edge of the Forrester estate, the low hum of a conversation drifted from an open garden door. The voice was unmistakable: Poppy, Luna's mother, speaking in an urgent whisper to someone whose tone was cold and businesslike. Liam froze, hidden by the hedge, listening. "The plan worked perfectly," the man said. "No one will question the body. It's unrecognizable. You've bought her time, but make sure she stays hidden." Poppy's reply came trembling but resolute. "I'll handle it. No one can know Luna is alive." The words struck him like an electric shock. Luna alive? It was impossible. She had been buried, mourned, her body identified, or so they believed. Liam's heart raced. Every instinct told him to walk away, to ignore what he had heard. But the voice of curiosity, the same voice that had driven him to uncover countless secrets before, refused to be silenced. He knew grief could drive people mad, but deception required intent. That night, as the city lights bled across the skyline, Liam began his quiet investigation. He revisited every detail of Luna's supposed death: the reports, the photographs, the coroner's statement. The inconsistencies emerged almost immediately. The body found in the ravine was burned beyond recognition, identified only through a bracelet that could easily have been planted. There were no dental records, no DNA confirmation, and the autopsy had been rushed, sealed by a private medical examiner hired by Poppy herself. Piece by piece, the facade began to crumble. Liam remembered Luna's last days before her death, her growing paranoia, her whispered fears about a stalker, her sudden withdrawal from the design team at Forrester Creations. He remembered Poppy's erratic behavior, her insistence on handling everything personally, her refusal to let anyone else view the body. The pattern was too precise, too orchestrated. The truth, once glimpsed, refused to fade. Driven by both suspicion and guilt, Liam followed Poppy's trail to a quiet coastal town 2 hours north of Los Angeles. There, hidden in a small villa surrounded by eucalyptus trees, he found her. And inside, he found Luna. She was alive. Pale, trembling, but alive. The shock nearly sent him to his knees. When she saw him, her expression flickered between relief and terror. Her hair was shorter, her frame thinner, but her eyes, those haunted, intelligent eyes, were unmistakable. The truth spilled from her in halting fragments. She had faked her death to escape someone powerful, someone who wanted her gone after she uncovered secrets involving a corporate scandal linked to Forrester's newest investor. The murder had been an illusion, carefully constructed, perfectly executed. The body in her place had belonged to an anonymous victim of a car accident, bought, swapped, and cremated under falsified documents. Poppy had orchestrated it all to protect her daughter, believing the world too dangerous for Luna's return. But truth, like a buried seed, always pushes back through the soil. Liam's discovery set off a chain of events that no one could control. He swore to protect Luna's secret until she was ready to face the world, but the truth had already begun to unravel through whispers and chance sightings. The tension grew unbearable as Forrester Creations prepared for its next major fashion showcase, a tribute to Luna's final collection. The irony was suffocating. Garments she had designed were now being celebrated as the legacy of a dead prodigy, while she lived, hidden and restless, watching from the shadows. Meanwhile, Steffi and Finn were finally finding peace. For months they had carried the guilt of Luna's death, both as mentors and as friends who had failed to protect her. The confession of the supposed killer, a rival designer driven by jealousy, had given them closure. Or so they thought. Yet, even in their grief, something inside Steffi resisted finality. She couldn't shake the feeling that Luna's story wasn't over. Perhaps it was the way Poppy avoided her gaze at the funeral, or the cold precision with which she handled the arrangements. Perhaps it was intuition, the same instinct that had guided Steffi through every corporate betrayal and personal loss before. On the night of the fashion show, the Forrester headquarters was transformed into a cathedral of light and silk. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and the runway glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Will, the young intern who had idolized Luna, stood backstage with Elektra, the ambitious model who had once been Luna's closest friend and fiercest competitor. They whispered about her designs, about how even in death, Luna's artistry haunted them. The audience held its breath as the first model stepped onto the runway, the lights cascading across fabrics that shimmered like moonlight. Then, in the middle of the show, the world stopped. A figure stepped from the shadows onto the catwalk. The crowd gasped. The music faltered. For a moment, it felt as if the air itself froze. It was Luna. Flesh, blood, alive. The room erupted into chaos, shouts, sobs, flashes of disbelief. Elektra's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Will went pale, his breath catching in his throat. Steffi and Finn stood, stunned, their minds refusing to reconcile what their eyes saw. Luna moved forward with quiet dignity, wearing one of her own unfinished gowns, the hem trailing like mist behind her. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on Poppy, who sat near the front, trembling, tears streaming silently down her face. Every secret that had been buried was suddenly exhumed beneath the harsh light of the runway. Steffi demanded answers, her composure cracking under the weight of betrayal. Finn felt anger surge like fire through his veins, anger at Poppy, at himself, at the lies that had turned their grief into spectacle. The reporters descended like vultures, their questions slicing through the tension. But Luna said nothing. She simply stood there, a living ghost in silk, as the world tried to decide whether to damn her or forgive her. Later that night, the truth unraveled in a storm of accusations and confessions. Poppy, cornered by both the press and the family she had deceived, broke down and admitted everything. She spoke of her desperation, of the threats made against Luna, of the corruption that reached deep into the company's financial underbelly. But she also confessed something deeper, that she could not bear to watch her daughter destroyed by the same world that had consumed so many before her. Her deception, she said, had been an act of love, not malice. Yet love, when twisted by fear, becomes its own kind of cruelty. Steffi's fury gave way to sorrow. She remembered her own losses, her brother, her father's betrayals, the years of rebuilding what could never truly be whole. She understood, on some level, what Poppy had done. But understanding did not erase the wound. For months, she and Finn had mourned a woman who still breathed, had built memorials out of lies. The revelation shattered more than their trust. It fractured their faith in the moral order that bound their world. In the high-gloss universe of fashion and fame, deception had become as common as beauty itself. Luna's return forced everyone to confront what they had become. Forrester Creations, once a symbol of legacy and art, now stood as a monument to illusion. Ridge and Brooke, who had tried to steer the company through its recent turmoil, were forced to confront the fallout as investors panicked and the media descended. Finn, torn between his medical ethics and his emotional scars, withdrew from the spotlight entirely. He could not forgive so easily, not when the image of the coffin, the fake body, and the tears he had shed replayed in his mind. Steffi, ever the warrior, channeled her rage into determination. If Luna was alive, then the truth behind her disappearance must be dragged into the light, no matter the cost. Liam, meanwhile, carried his own guilt. His discovery had saved Luna, but it had also unleashed chaos. In the aftermath of the fashion show, he found her again alone, sitting by the reflecting pool outside the Forrester mansion. Her reflection rippled beneath the moonlight, fractured and beautiful. She spoke softly, her voice heavy with remorse. She had not wanted to deceive them all, but fear had consumed her. She had seen too much, trusted the wrong people, and believed that death was the only escape. Now, faced with the aftermath of her resurrection, she felt more trapped than ever. Liam listened, torn between admiration and sorrow. Luna's courage had saved her life, but her deception had cost her soul. He told her that truth was the only way forward, that hiding had brought nothing but destruction. And in that quiet exchange, beneath the ghostly glow of the water, she began to understand that survival without truth was merely another form of death. The weeks that followed were a reckoning. Investigations revealed the layers of corruption buried beneath the glamorous facade of Forrester Creations, the falsified contracts, the shadow investors, the threats that had driven Luna into hiding. The man behind it all, a powerful financier with connections across the fashion world, was finally exposed. His downfall was swift and brutal, but the damage remained. The company's image was scarred, its people broken. Yet amidst the wreckage, something fragile and new began to grow, a sense of honesty that had long been absent. Luna, though forgiven by some and condemned by others, found herself at the heart of this rebirth. She worked tirelessly to repair what had been broken, pouring her guilt and redemption into her designs. Her new collection, titled Resurrection, debuted 6 months later in a quiet gallery, far from the chaos of the media. Each piece told a story of loss, deception, and the painful beauty of survival. Steffi attended in silence, Finn beside her, their expressions unreadable. But when the final model stepped onto the runway, a gown of pale gold embroidered with the word truth, Steffi's eyes filled with tears. She understood, then, that forgiveness was not surrender, it was evolution. In the end, Luna's return had not destroyed Forrester Creations, it had purified it. Beneath the layers of scandal and sorrow, the family found something more enduring than reputation: humanity. And for Luna herself, the journey from death to life became her greatest creation. She learned that truth, once buried, always finds its way to the surface, and that sometimes the most beautiful rebirths are born not from perfection, but from the ashes of a life finally undone.